Today I am going to talk about As a Cartoonist by Noah Van Sciver. This was published in late July of this year by Fantagraphics. It's a collection of some previously released short stories and some previously unreleased short stories with a couple of unifying themes. So if I had to describe this book, I would say it's a collection of stories, some previously published, some not published, that is features more of his serious stories. I mean, Noah's known for his humor. That's how I found him, but he doesn't get enough credit, in my opinion, as being really great at serious long form stories and short form stories. And this book really features that, and I'm glad because he does have those chops. But the book does have a unifying theme. It's just not a random collection of short stories like an anthology. So he starts off with this picture of Noah in the grass, and there's all these books flying in the air, and this is relevant later. Then next you have these portraits that Noah did in black and white of famous cartoonists from the earlier part of the previous century. And I'll just admit I wasn't familiar with a lot of them, but when you look them up and you find out what they did, there really were pioneers, and that people broke a lot of barriers. I'm familiar with Bill Malden only because I'm a fan of history, especially 20th century history, and the work that he did. And Joe Sacco continues that war correspondent cartoonist, ability just to convey the horrors of war. And then at the end, he introduces the master cartoonist, which is a character that he made up, but it's supposed to be representative of like late 19th century cartoonists. This story, he talks about his experiences in Vermont, and how in this story they're at a barbecue. If somebody says, "Hey, I heard you're a Mormon," he's like, "No, my family was raised Mormon. However," he explains, and it's been explained in a lot of other stories, his parents got divorced, the mom took them out of the church, so he's no longer a Mormon. But they're all like, "Oh, you're Mormon." And they all talk about Mormonism being like this weird death cult, and like how he must be traumatized by being in that religion. And there's this thing about, I don't know about other countries, but definitely in America, where if your religion isn't like Christian, like Catholic or like Presbyterian or Baptist, then everything else is weird. Like if you're in the Mormonism, you're weird, or if you're in the Hinduism, you're weird. And I'm not a big fan of organized religion in general, so they're all, when you look at them, they all have their weirdness, but they all treat him like he's some kind of victim. And this is just a repeating story, and you kind of feel bad for him because he has to explain this over and over again. And so we'll have this story where he's helping this guy move, and this guy's like, well, he's being like a tool. He's one of those people that like are being a tool, and they're being passive aggressive, and he just calls him out on it. So then he complains to the school, even though he's graduated, and said, "Oh, well, I felt uncomfortable." And it's like, why am I the problem? And so he's sitting here in his room just drawing, and then he has this flashback about being bullied. And so it's these time shifting things where this fills in so many of these blanks, and you get an insight into his state of mind, and what's going through his mind. It's just really well done. Just the use of, 2 or 3 colors, and just very short, but it gets the point across. And Noah also does these wonderful Vista scenes. These are pacing elements that he's talked about that he does, but they really work, and these really are gorgeous. He really does a nice job with scenic type of landscapes. Here's a story about him as an adult remembering a time when he went fishing with his dad, but then halfway through the story he realizes, wait a minute, my dad never took me fishing. My dad left us when we were 9. This is probably something that I saw in a commercial, and I imprint this memory. And it's kind of interesting because memory has a weird way of playing tricks with you. People remember events not in the way they really happen. It's that thing about having an accident, 12 people see it and they have 12 different stories. But sometimes how memories play tricks on us, and sometimes how we want to remember things a certain way or we don't want to remember things a certain way. Just thought it was kind of, I don't know if that's what's intent, but I've always found this concept of how memory plays tricks on you interesting. This next story, you're shifting back in time, is 2008. I think Noah started cartooning in 2007, so very early in his career, and he's at a signing with Jules Pfeiffer, and he asked Jules Pfeiffer, look, what do I do? I want to be a cartoonist, but I keep getting rejected. And his advice is like, you know what? Just keep trying. Don't give up, because eventually they'll get tired of telling you no to everything. And in this scene, he's hunched over and he's got his hat on because it's cold, because this is Denver, and he's walking this way. And this kind of like street light, this kind of like yellowish light. And then here, after hearing this advice, he comes back and he's determined, and he has this thing, like he has the eye of the tiger. And I just like how everything here is blue background and yellow foreground lighting, but then here, this last panel, it's flipped, just so you can see the tiger. Everything is in this blue shading, but the tiger is in this yellow. It's a really nice, really good use of color to draw your eye to this. You know, this whole idea of like, I'm just re-energized again. He has a story about, giving a talk about cartooning that's called the 19th Century Cartoonist, who is the one we saw earlier. And even though he doesn't use a lot of humor, here he puts in this really funny gag. Not going to spoil it, but it's pretty nice break of really something 5 panels, and it's hilarious. And here he's just experienced of just answering questions from the audience. Here he has a story about when him, Tom Spurgeon, and Evan Dorkin were together in 2016. And Evan Dorkin makes this commentary about how you can have social media followers, but they don't necessarily buy your work. And he talks about, he says this, like, everyone wants to come to your party, but nobody wants to pitch in for the alcohol. And it's true. It's this one panel, but it says so much about people that sometimes we focus on getting the social media following, but it doesn't automatically translate into dollars, which is what cartoonists really need. I just thought it was a really great statement on that. Here Noah goes to a gallery opening, and this artist just puts words on canvas. And he's looking at it, and then there's just 2 pages flashback. And this is really, for me, just brilliant, because Noah's doing the same thing as a kid. And this art teacher tells him, no, paintings don't have words, signs do. And then he takes a moment to, instead of being positive, he takes a moment to kind of embarrass Noah. And Noah's got his, eyes closed, his head's down, and he's telling the class, look, art has to be subtle. You can't, put things, people, you can't put the art in people's face, and you can't use words. And these other people are like, yes, I see, I agree. And then it goes back to the current story. And I really like this because it informs, like when he sees this, what's going through his head, but also, to me, it's a little commentary about how a lot of art teachers, they have an opinion, and they think it's like some kind of physical law that cannot be broken. But it's not. Art is subjective. And I mean, anybody say that you can't have words in a painting or an art never saw Andy Warhol. To me, this is just a great, how would I say it? I don't want to say indictment, but of this elitism and maybe this gatekeeping that a lot of the art community do, especially these old heads that, they learned it a certain way and this is the way. When art is really just subjective. You may not like it, it might be good art, it might be bad art, but it's subjective. And here we have another page break, and you have all these pages from we saw earlier. Here, now we have all these pages scattered away in another beautiful scenic vista. The next story is Jonah. This story was featured in Now #1 by Fantagraphics. So I'm glad it's reprinted here because I've tried to get a copy of Now #1, and you can find them, but people are asking, in my mind, ridiculous prices for them. So I would have gotten it for this story, so I'm glad. Having said that, it's a story about him being in Denver for a gallery exhibition of his own work, and he's staying with his family, and his brother Jonah picks him up. And his brother Jonah is like one of those guys that's like 30 years old, but will always act like he's 16. And there's some adults like that. I had a brother like that just they were always going to be 16 years old, and so his brother's a player. They go out to dinner, and they leave him alone at the table for a while, him and his girlfriend, Jonah and his girlfriend. And then he's like, man, what were you doing all that time? Were you getting busy? And he's like, no, bro, I was buying you this keychain. They're at this restaurant called Old Chicago. So it's this ongoing story about dealing with his brother Jonah and just being also in Denver, talking to his family and stuff. And it shows like people recognize where he went back to his old haunts, and they're happy for him, doing well as cartooning. Again, he's at this gallery and he's being interviewed by the New York Times. All of a sudden, Jonah's brother shows up and he's got like, "Yo, there's my bro," and he's acting like just really loud. And he's hitting on the reporter from the Times, and he just loses and yells at him. Then he feels bad, but there's this ongoing story here where he has this keychain that's really sentimental to him, because even though Jonah, he has a good heart somewhere, but he is kind of selfish, but he's not like a guy's going to commit crimes. So at the end of the story, Jonah's driving back to the airport, and Noah complains about how that keychain is pointy, but it's like, yeah, it hurts, but it means a lot to me because you got it for me. And then Jonah says, oh, I didn't buy that. I found next to some dog shit in the snow. So, Noah's really touched by this, this little generous little thing that he gave him. And he realized, no, I didn't really buy that for you. I just found it on the ground, and he just used it to make up a story. So he's just incorrigible. And one little note that here, he's texting his friend Leslie. I didn't think much about it. But then later on in the story, he's texting her again. And she's at work. She says, hey, I can't talk, I'm at work. And she's at a restaurant bar. And I realized, oh, this is Leslie Stein. Cartoonist Leslie Stein, because before she went full-time, that's what she did as a living. And it reminds me of that scene in I Don't Hate Your Guts where Noah is talking to Alice Graham, but you don't know it's really Alice Graham. He does this one panel, goes, oh, my friend Alice came by to pick up some comics. And then it's Alice Graham. I found out later it is Alice Graham, and how he has Evan Dorkin here. How there's just like community of cartoonists that just kind of like intersect a little bit and then out. But it's just kind of interesting how they're all connected in one way. That's what I thought anyway. I thought it was kind of cool. But yeah, there are some people like that. They're just never going to change. Here he has a story. This is actually called From the What If Department. This is a really hilarious story. He has a dream where he is the new artist for the famous Franco-Belgian character Clifton. And you have these people who are, they're French, and they're like saying, I detest Americans. And none of this is translated. So I speak and read Spanish, so I can get it because they're all based on Latin. But he doesn't translate it, but just go into Google Translate or Translate app on iPhone, and these are hilarious. And even he's like, oh, I don't think I'm the right guy. And then his first story is Clifton meets the Harlem Globetrotters, and this was like one of those 1970s like hostess ads that you would see like for the Harlem Globetrotters. It's just really a funny one-page commentary, and it's just a really nice breakup. It's really funny. Here's a story about Noah and his father reconnecting after so many years apart. They do have a relationship now. He's talking to partner Amy about it. And towards the end, you have this story called Colombia, and it's about his life where he lives now in Colombia, South Carolina, with his wife Amy. And how he talks about, this is Colombia, he talks about his observations about Colombia itself, and then, we're at home, and you see, we have our books, we have each other, and she's just sitting there with her legs on his lap, and it's just really nice because you see all the struggles that he went through to become a cartoonist, and there's this ongoing feeling, he's not, like, there's this feeling of, like, he's on his own, doing this all on his own. He has friends, but he doesn't have that one person there. And then they have this one panel break here, which is continuation of the papers flying, where he's collecting the pages, but Amy's here with him in this little corner here. And it's like he has someone that can support him in doing this thing that he really wants to do. And it's really hard in life to find a partner or someone that just really supports you. And it's just nice. It's just kind of like a nice, like, at this point, this is where he's at. It's just really sweet. You've had to be, I think, married, or you have to have found someone that will do these things for you, support you, in order to really appreciate having someone that can support you. And then the book, the last story is Remy. It's a one-page book that he published online. It's about the moments after his wife gave birth and had to go to surgery, and how he was alone with the baby in his first. And this really encapsulated that moment, because I have 3 kids. That I've been through all the births, and they're all wonderful events. But that first time, you don't know what to do with the baby. You see this baby born, and you're like, what do I do? There's all these things, because everything is brand new. So, the baby's crying, and the nurse says, "Oh, I left something. Just stay with him." And baby's crying, and he's like, "Hey, don't cry, don't cry." And then, like, the baby just stops crying, looks up at him, and then he says, "Hi, son, I'm your father." And I know what that feeling's like, where you, for the first time, are seeing your child, and you're responsible for this life, and you're like, "Oh, I'm your father." And it's just, this thing just really hit me in the heart. And he ends the book, here he has a list of all the stories, and if they were previously published where, and if they weren't, if they were unreleased, previously unpublished, excuse me. And then here he has this listing of a few comics that have helped me along the way. And he draws the covers of about 60 comics, and all these comics are classic. And I hate to admit that I've only read about 5 or 6 of them, but the ones I've read, I know are just amazing. Like 100 Demons by Linda Berry. I read this. This is a brilliant book. It made me a fan of hers. He has Ernie Bushmiller's Nancy. A Drifting Life by Yoshihiro Tatsumi. I've read this. This is a fabulous book. It's just so many great books here. This is just a book that if you really, really want to read great graphic novels, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a list of everything here and just eventually read it. Hicksville by Dylan Herricks, which is a really great book. So this is these helped me along the way, but I think also if you really want to read great graphic novels, you could just go down this list and see some masterful works. And that's it. This is a great collection of, as I said, his more serious work. It's not a downer. It's just not full of gags, but he does have those chops. I'm glad it's presented in a book. I'd like to see more of that type of work from him. If you get a chance, you can still find Blamo's 9 and 10 fairly easily. Those have other serious long-form stories. There's one in Blamo 10 that I love. It's one of my favorite stories ever done. It's not featured here. You may want to check that out. But, Noah Van Sciver is my favorite cartoonist working today. This is a brilliant collection. I love how there's time shifting. I love how you get an idea of the things that he went through as a kid, as a young adult, as later in life, to get to the point where he's at now. And sometimes in a non-linear way, but it's really each story is enjoyable on its own, but it works as a total package too. It's like an album that each song is good, but together the sum of the parts is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Thank you. I try to figure out that saying. And again, just great work. Highly recommended. Thanks.